Welcome to the last and final episode of our APR class, and Nez Savala, who is St. Louis PRSA APR, is going to give this class. Those of you that have actually learned from her in the past, you know she's absolutely amazing, and she definitely knows her stuff. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Nez.
Okay.
Thanks for hosting tonight.
No pressure there. You're welcome. Okay, so I understand this is y'all's last session of the I'm going to say season because that's the only word that comes to my mind. So it's understanding communication theories, models, and history of the profession. So before we get started, I wanted to remind you all that this is worth 8% of the exam. Let me go back to the beginning. So the research, the RPIE is 33%, and leading the public relations function is 18%. Managing relationships is 15%. Ethics and law is 13%. Managing issues and crisis communications is 13%. And this one is understanding communication models and theories, and history is 8%. So when I took the exam a few years ago, communications, models, and theories was its own section, and it was 15%, and history was 2%. So they've been combined, and the percentages have changed across the categories, but just because it's 8% doesn't mean it's not as important. So please make sure that you are familiar with the communication models and theories, because there will be some specific questions about them, but then there will also be these case study scenario type questions that will include communication models and theories. And so you'll need to be up on your game to know what those are as part of the overall exam. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And for some reason, my headphones aren't working properly. So if you need me to speak up, just say so. Or if I cut out, just, let me know that you can't hear me. So did you have a chance to start going over the chapter and the guide and the book before you started tonight? Do you have any questions, Bridget?
No questions, except I kept thinking about the election, and it's like, oh, it's that one, it's that, and so, yeah.
I scribbled that in my notes too. Read current events and how they tie into some of these theories, so we can get into that in a little bit. Paul, what about you?
I'll be honest, I've been way more focused on my panel presentation, and because it's such a beast.
Okay.
So I haven't been studying as much because I've been trying to compartmentalize. I flipped through the study guide, but I'm really trying to just get pen to paper on that.
Right, the questionnaire?
Correct.
Yeah, I told y'all it was going to take some time, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
You got to put in work. That's like a whole other job.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, the thing is too, I'm just gathering all the documentation for the example that I'm doing. So that's taking, a lot of time. But Bridget, was the event that you were going to do, has that happened yet?
Yes, and I'm thinking, plus the other one that I was thinking about doing was about the census, and that just completely fell apart. So I'm going to have to choose another project, but I've got plenty to choose from and to start with. Yeah. Because I'd rather not do one that's already passed.
Okay. Chris, what about you for these communication models and theories?
So I have not had a chance to review it yet.
Okay.
And my real focus is going to be after January 1 and spending a lot of time in January reviewing all of this. But I'm still thinking my project is going to be on one of the dedication ceremonies for the Gary Sinise Foundation that I held. I have dozens of those I can choose from, different locations across the country.
Okay. That's fine. No judgment, because I know everybody is working and we're all busy and things happen. So what I want to do is I want to start in the study guide. So in the guide, my page is 127. but that's because I have a coach's guide. But if you'll flip to the section, Understanding Communications Theories, Models, and History of the Profession, I've already gone over that first part, that it is 8%. And so make sure you're familiar with the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities for those topics, which again, like I'm gonna sound like a broken record, communication, public relations, models and theories, barriers to communication, and knowledge of the field. And so that section starts with theories. Make sure you read that paragraph, and then whichever book that you have, and I still have my book, I have this one, Public Relations Strategies and Tactics by Wilcox and Cameron. This is the 10th edition. I think there's probably a newer one, but this is the book that I had, so I'm using that one. But you do have the reader's guide in this, in the APR study guide. So let's flip to.
What's the section again? I've just found the table of contents.
It's okay. It's called Understanding Communication Theories, Models, and the History of the Profession.
Okay, so that's
It should be the
112.
last. It should be the last section in your study guide.
That's 112 in my study guide.
Okay, yeah, my numbers are different because there's coaches' tips thrown off in here. So the page numbers are different. But if you flip to the section, it starts with theories, and then the next section is a series of tables. And the first table is transmission media effects theories. And let me know when you're there.
Yeah, I found it.
Got it.
Okay, okay. So yeah, we'll start with and this study guide is a little bit different than the one that I had for some years ago. And I feel like this is laid out a little bit better as far as breaking down the theories and segmenting them. So you'll see this is transmission media effects theories. There are 6 theories laid out. The magic bullet and hypodermic needle theory. It gives you a description and an example. So the example for the magic bullet is, I saw an ad for an iPhone and I just had to have one. And one of the things I thought about with this theory is it ties into one of the other theories, which is early, they're like 5 levels of adoption. And this reminded me of that early adopter. For me, I am one of those late adopters or laggards. Like, I'm not the person who gets something because it's brand new and it just came out. True story, it took me years to get a cell phone. And I've only had like 5 phones. I don't get a new phone every other year. My last phone was I had a Samsung S3 for so long, they stopped making it. And then I broke it. I dropped it. And so I filed an insurance claim. I got an S7 instead of whatever S5 instead of what the newest one is. And now my latest phone is an S7, which they don't make it anymore. Samsung makes something else. So when I thought of this magic bullet hypodermic needle, I thought of myself because I am none of these things. Then there's the other theory. There's a theory called 2-step flow, which kind of models this 2-step theory of information. There's agenda setting, which I have put an asterisk next to, along with questions. For agenda setting, let's talk about current events, current examples of agenda setting and framing, second level agenda setting that we are all experiencing every day. So who wants to start with an example? I will put one out there for agenda setting, social justice issues. And then we can use Breonna Taylor or George Floyd as an example. And I'm using that in the sense of framing and second level agenda setting because of how media or how some media have chosen to frame George Floyd as a person. Mm-hmm. Some people have chosen to frame Breonna Taylor as a person, whether that's negative or positive. So that second level, that agenda setting, framing / second level agenda setting, I feel could be used or is a communication theory that can be used around social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
Are you following where I'm going with that one, how that fits in?
Yeah.
Would coronavirus fit in there as well? Because I see us, as in the team that I work on, looking at our communications messages based on the news that's out there and what others are saying or doing and what seems to be the right verbiage at that particular time. And it seems to fit in there, but I just want to make sure that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, I wrote that down too, the COVID-19 pandemic. I think it fits into a lot of these communication theories, audience theories. There's several, but definitely, I think there isn't just one. It could fit into several different types of messaging theories and PR theories. Like, again, agenda setting. You want to set the agenda positively that COVID-19, you got to wear your mask. Here's the facts about COVID-19 and being safe, although some people may disagree with what's been explained, probably ad nauseum, but needs to continue to be explained. But yes, I think it ties in. You can use COVID-19 and the pandemic in several of these theories.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you also say, prior to COVID, when there were a lot of shootings, and agenda setting for gun legislation, kind of in coverage of the shootings, would you say those were related in this theory?
Yeah. I would say so. Yeah, agenda setting. I would gun legislation. Yes. Probably in your industry, you can think of some examples of agenda setting that we may not be familiar with, but you are, because you are in the agricultural industry.
Yep.
Can you think of any examples off the top of your head?
I would say, like in Europe right now, they have a farm to fork initiative that's going on. And so a lot of it is kind of rooted in production practices and regenerative agriculture and those types of things. So based on this initiative that's out there, you're just seeing a lot more, I guess, coverage of some of these practices that feed into what this farm to fork initiative could look like.
Okay, and then so that farm to fork initiative, using a communication theory or a model, is it going to influence? Are you trying to influence outcome? What are you trying to influence? Or do you know what they're trying to influence? Like, think like that. Are they trying to influence behavior? Are we trying to sell more products? Are you trying to improve
legislation too? You're trying to influence legislation. Could that be a part of it?
All of those are outcomes.
Okay.
Related to, and you're not going to use you probably won't use just one communication theory.
Yeah.
Efforts. You don't have to use just one. You can use a compilation of several. Chris, you've probably used a few of these communication theories in your work, whether working with the Gary Sinise Foundation or some other clients. Like, I will use the audience theory of diffusion of innovation, which basically, I can't read this. It's, the print's tiny and my contact lenses are bad. But the diffusion of innovation theory, it just basically I will read the example that in June of 1995, only 14% of Americans use the internet. By August of 2011, that number climbed to nearly 80%, right? So diffusion of innovation is, I'm gonna break this down as simple as I know how. You've got this new thing and you're trying to get the community, you're trying to get your audience to use it. It's innovative, it's new, but how do you get it to grow and build awareness? So diffusion of innovation using this example that in 1995, only 14% of America used the internet, and now in 2011 it's 80%. I can only imagine what it is now in 2020. So that innovation. So Chris, can you think of ways of any sort of clients that you've worked with that that this theory might fall into, or another one?
Well, I think when I started my tech company in 1998, I mean, we targeted those that had internet, and it has completely changed, obviously, in the 4 years that we had that. And I mean, other things changed as well, such as the economy and 9/11, and which caused a number of our optics or directions to change. So I think diffusion of innovation, yes, during that time frame. I mean, we realized the target market we were looking at didn't understand that you had to buy a product and wait 7 days to get it. So it was a challenge to get people to understand or to educate people on that.
Okay. So in some way, shape, or form, whether you knew it or not, you are using these communication models, these theories in your work, especially when you're planning. So Paul, like if you are planning and using that farm to fork happening in Europe, but if you were doing this in here, you might have to alter it a little bit, but you know, there's going to be some communication theories and some models that you would need to follow. Again, whether you knew you were doing it or not, but now because you're studying this APR, you can be more informed about those kind of models. And then Bridget, you used COVID-19 as an example, which makes sense because in school, in higher ed PR, my experience, that's been the primary focus since March of this year. And it doesn't look like we're going to be talking about anything else for quite some time. So,
well, and for what I do at UMKC, I consider social media to be part of, in that one, diffusion of innovation too, because I think I consider myself an early adopter, but the organization I worked for at the time wasn't ready for it. But I knew, well, I didn't know, but I just felt like it was going to happen. I heard and read a lot of smart marketers and PR people saying, you know, learn it because it's going to happen, it's going to come. And now when I see some of my former supervisors, they say, I remember you were in the back of the room tweeting and we weren't quite sure, we were skeptical, but look at now, everyone's using social media for everything, and it's how we get our information now. So
yeah, I would
really
agree. I would agree. When I worked for Hazelwood School District, it took a while for the district, or it's not just the district, but it took a while for the communications office to want to use Facebook. Of course, I shied away from it. I was like, I don't want any parts of that, but look at me now, I have to use it. It became very clear that if I was going to remain relevant in public relations and communications, whether I liked it or not, which I didn't, and I'm still not a huge fan, but I had to learn how to use social media. I had to learn how to use Facebook. I had to learn how to use Twitter, and those were the two big things. And you know, now there's Instagram and everything else. So that does make sense. Sometimes it's gonna take a while for that innovation to take hold. It doesn't happen quickly. And there is a chart, it's in my notebook. It's probably, I'm not sure it's in yours, but it's a chart that it's a graphic that shows the diffusion of innovation theory and how it takes a while to take off, for lack of a better explanation. Okay, so transmission and media effects theories, there are several. There is one also called cultivation theory, and it's defined as mass media, particularly television, shapes or cultivates people's view of social reality. Secondhand experience through media content can distort what people think of the world. George Gerbner, who began this line of thinking, found that people who watched lots of TV tended to be fearful of the world, suspicious of others, and susceptible to social paranoia or conspiracy theories, meaning the world or scary world effect. Does any of that sound familiar to you?
Yeah. Not, I wouldn't say I am a news junkie. I don't think that well, I guess I become a little pessimistic, but I still go downtown after 6 p.m. and stuff. But I know my elderly mom, if she sees it on Facebook or she sees it on the news, she's gonna stay away and not do something. It can also be used for good too, because she's wearing her mask wherever she goes as well and thinking twice about going out. So there are some good parts of that as well.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on cultivation?
I feel like we're living it from all sides of the political spectrum at this point.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that one, because that's the first thing I thought of. The current presidential administration, the current administration period, that the use of mass media, which, you know, we're not going to avoid mass media, but the seeds of doubt that have been dropped about the election and whether it was legal, those kind of things, but those seeds were dropped long before November came along. So it cultivated the idea that you see right now that, you know, regardless of the results of the election, some people are suspect and have theories that it wasn't a fair election because it has been cultivated in that manner.
Yeah, and I kind of look at it too, the, Fox News and CNN and getting confirmation bias from one or the other based on your political endeavors.
Okay, yep. That's a good.
That goes into audience theories.
It does go into audience
Nice
theories.
pick.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. So we talked a little bit about diffusion of innovation. Then under audience theories, there's uses and gratification, meaning that people are seeking out communication to satisfy a specific need. The example is college students prefer to get their news through social networks rather than through traditional mass media news. That is something that became clear to me as I was working in K-12. Some people, the students aren't the news hounds, it's the adults. And so some of the younger adults I worked with, they got all their news off social media, which made no sense to me, none. But to each their own. So there is uses and gratifications, and now kind of what Paul was getting at. It's now what did you call it? Like the differences in the content?
Well, what I was confirmation bias.
Yes.
So that you seek out viewpoints or news that supports your beliefs.
Mm-hmm. So that, to me, that makes sense under uses and gratifications, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm a Fox News junkie, I'm going to get my news from Fox and forget what MSNBC says.
Yeah.
Or if I like MSNBC and CNN, I might take them both in. But again, uses and gratifications to satisfy specific needs. There's also third person effect. And I'll just get to the example that they're giving. Comments on Twitter about our product are ridiculous. Any thinking person can see these statements are baseless. Nevertheless, we better reduce the price to prevent a drop in sales. Right, Twitter moves quickly. And I had a friend point that out to me during the height of the unrest in Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed. She was not the PR person for the city of Ferguson, but she did manage the city's Twitter account, and she would call me and ask me about things that she'd seen on Twitter that, were related to the college, or not the college, related to the situation, and tagged Ferguson. but it was moving so quickly, she just couldn't figure out how to keep up. And I basically just told her to slow it down, let Twitter do what it's going to do, and make sure that you follow through on the positive messaging and stick with whatever messaging their media consultants provided to them. But that kind of goes into that third person effect that, to me, sometimes people will read something, whether it's on the internet, which is the example we're using, or in a paper or magazine, and think because it's there, it's true. Do y'all remember that commercial where the lady says, they can't put anything wrong on the internet? Remember that? There's a commercial a few years ago. Well, that was sarcastic, because just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true.
Well, and I think too with social media, we all find our favorite people and like-minded people to follow. And so sometimes it seems like things are just really big and blown up, but it may only be within our certain circle. So I think, like when I'm monitoring social media and making sure that when I'm sharing it back to leadership, that I'm not making it sound, overly terrible or undershooting it either, just because of the particular people that I may be following and monitoring may be talking about it a lot, but in the whole scheme of things, it may not be but a fraction of the entire discussion. So it's sometimes hard to remember that, or I forget about it and get caught up in, oh, this is going to be a crisis or a situation, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just being discussed in that group.
That makes sense. Paul, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, and I don't know if this is an accurate example, but I think of citizen journalism. Anyone could be a journalist that has a cell phone. And so you see, people on airplanes, and everyone's taking a video and someone's getting dragged off the airplane. And it's more sensationalized through the people that are actually on the airplane getting this video. And that's what is getting all the clicks and the eyes, as opposed to CNN reporting on it or, any other news outlets. It's like this citizen journalism that sensationalizes these events.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that would fit into this.
I think it might. I mean, examples like that fit in, I think, could fit into several of these theories, but again, it's the audience, right? So if you've taken this video of a situation on an airplane or in a restaurant or something like that, and you proclaim to be a citizen journalist, the people who are following you are the ones who are eating this up, right? So yeah, it could be that third person effect, or uses and gratifications. And then there's one called the spiral of silence. And the example is, I know people don't agree with me, therefore I'm keeping my opinions to myself. So
would you classify, and I hate to say this, kind of the election projections before the election as to all the pollsters had it all wrong? And I mean, I think people, when they took those polls, were either silent or didn't give their correct views, which is why the pollsters got it all wrong. So
I don't know. I think you'll never know. Sometimes I wonder, who are the people, these pollsters, who are they talking to? I don't know, but it could be, because this spiral of silence theory is something that is relatively new to me. I don't recall learning about this before, but it does kind of make sense. Sometimes you don't agree, and maybe you don't want to be part of the conversation. You don't want to get into an argument. You just don't want to deal with it, so you don't say anything. I never really thought of that as an audience theory.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering it's an audience theory, but how do you how do you work around that? To me, that seems like a barrier. And how would you work around that as a communicator?
Well, Chris, to your point, I feel like in 2016, a lot of those that supported Trump weren't necessarily open about it. And so I think that's why it was such a surprise during the election, because a lot of those that supported Trump weren't necessarily, didn't communicate that. And I feel like this time around, those that were voting for Trump were much more forthright with their viewpoint.
Well, and I think to go back to the spiral of silence, and I'm probably guilty of this too, because I have a lot of people on both sides, obviously, that I'm friends with on, let's just say, Facebook. And I did not say one thing political at all during the entire election. Not one thing. So, I mean, I was silent on my political views, but I monitored all of the views of everyone around me to kind of gauge where they were at. And it was crazy from one side of the spectrum to the other side. But I did not engage.
Okay. And using that as an example is probably a smart decision. Saved yourself some headaches. Another one of these audience theories that I highlighted is the situational theory of publics, and it uses the example of elected church decision makers are more likely to seek information about church issues from church newspapers than rank and file church members. So situational theory of publics. And I also wrote down wearing masks to minimize the spread of COVID-19. I feel like the COVID-19 pandemic can fit into just about any one of these theories. But again, this one, the situational theory of publics is defined as context influences relationships. Publics are active or passive. People are more likely to seek information related to a decision they are making than to reinforce their attitudes. So they are looking for information related to a decision that they're about to make rather than to reinforce their attitudes. So let's say if someone is trying to make a decision, should I wear a mask or should I not? It's a situational theory of publics. And there's steps. So they recognize the problem. There's an awareness. There's also a constraint, what's required or what motivates a person to act. And then the level of involvement. Some publics are more active on issues and others aren't. And passive publics usually aren't interested in the issue or it's not important to them. So you could use COVID, but you could use it any sort of situation, like social justice issues or situations that you may be involved in at your place of employment or the industry that you work in.
So how would you classify the deniers?
That is a question I don't have an answer for. I don't know.
Because they're not active or passive. Well, I guess they are active, but in a completely opposite way.
They're active in not believing in
Correct.
whatever the situation is. I don't know how to define, I don't know where you would place them. So there's lots of these audience theories for you all to study on. And since it's like 6:30, I want to make sure we get through some of the other ones and get to the communication model. So right now we're in theories. So then there are also message theories, framing, which we kind of hinted at a little bit in the beginning category of theories. Message theories are framing, rhetoric, and something called the sleeper effect, which is part of propaganda. Then there are public relations theories, or theories that are specific to public relations, like agenda building, competence. And I liked the competence one, I put an asterisk next to it. that a PR practitioner's knowledge and skills determines their role in an organization. A PR practitioner's knowledge and skills determines their role in an organization. And the example is, as a technician, I'm concerned most with output, message content, and framing. As a manager, I'm concerned with outcomes and relational results or goodwill. So all of us have had a few years of PR experience under our belt. And I feel like this kind of this makes some sense, that your knowledge and skills determine your role in an organization. When I was new to public relations, like for real, my first legit job that was focused on public relations was with the city of Ferguson as the community relations coordinator in 2005. The person who had the job before me did not have any sort of public relations training or education. It's my understanding that she was hired for that job because she did a good job organizing a community event, and one of the elected officials thought, oh, she could be good for public relations. To me, that meant that the elected officials and city leadership didn't really know what public relations was or how it could benefit the city. She didn't last long. She quit. And so I came along and I was interviewed with about 8 people, and they did 2 rounds of interviews. And I give this as example because I didn't have a lot of experience professionally, but I had knowledge. And I'm saying this because the city manager who offered me the job and hired me told me that out of those 8 people, they brought me in for the second round, and I was the only person they invited back for the second round. And he said it wasn't because I had more experience than others, but because I had the knowledge, I was eager, and I was prepared. So I showed my competence, right? Not so much my experience, but my competence. And my competence was able to get my foot in the door, and it also helped build my place within the organization, not just my place as a person, but that position. So when I left that job, they worked hard to find somebody else to fill that role, and they did. And then she moved on. And unfortunately, the leadership at that time was like, well, we don't need another PR person. And well, then 2014 happened. And to my knowledge, the city still does not have a dedicated public relations person, but I am using that as an example that your competence could determine your role in an organization. Have any of you experienced how your understanding and your knowledge of public relations has either elevated you in your organization or changed the way people see that role?
Yes. And I think it also depends upon the type of leadership that is in leadership. Because one set of leaders actually understood the competence that I had, and the other new leadership that was brought in didn't care about competence. They wanted to set the direction and the tone. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bridget,
and
what
that's,
about you? Oh, Paul, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it's interesting because in our organization, and there's only about 25 of us, but our CEO comes from a communications background. And so having her in that leadership role in working with our board, she knows that communications has a big impact on reputation, that it has a big impact on, issues management and trying to prevent a crisis. So I think having a person in a leadership role that has that communications background has really helped elevate our entire team to the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bridget, what about you?
Yeah, I in my current job and previous jobs, I can relate to both. Like Chris said, probably have examples of all of them over the course of the years. I'm also finding that where I am right now at UMKC, it can even change from year to year or, chancellor to chancellor. And so that becomes a challenge dealing with that when you're hired for competency, under previous administration, and then it changes, and then not sure that it has the competency changed or has the goal changed, or is the
Oh, you're frozen.
Bridget may have to log back in.
Huh?
She may have to log back in, but I do have a question.
Okay. Oh, she's back.
Oh, cool.
sorry.
No, it's okay. The internet gerbils locked you out for a second. You were frozen. So what were you going to say, Chris?
Now, I guess the question that I have is on the exam, is it more multiple choice or is it explain the theory of rhetoric and you have to essay format?
So I didn't have to do any long form essays. The exam is multiple choice. There will be scenarios, so in the back of your study guide, there's case studies, and I would highly recommend that you take some time to review those case studies and practice them. Understand though, that when you get to the exam, the case studies and the situations will not be this lengthy. You'll get a couple paragraphs, but you won't get, 2 pages of content to read, because you only have so much time to complete the exam. But all of the questions are multiple choice. So some of them may be define, choose the definition of competence, public relations specific theories, competence, and it'll get, you'll have 4 or 5 choices, and it'll tell you to pick 1 or pick 2. Or you may be asked to identify the theory based on the scenario. Honestly, there is no way y'all are going to know every single one of these theories. If you have that mental capacity, God bless you, because I didn't. But there are some that you're just make sure you know a little bit about the breakdown of the theories and the theories that seem to stand out. Like under this public relations specific theories, I would definitely make sure you are aware of, there's 4 of them, that you're aware of all 4 of those. Make sure you're aware of all 3 of the message theories. Now there's a long list of these audience theories. Diffusion of innovation is one that you should be aware of. Definitely. Social judgment, and some others. And so make sure you make those note cards. I dug it out. Hang on one second. I'll show it to you. I think I remember telling you all that I made study note cards, and so I kept them with me in my purse. Anytime I went somewhere, I had these note cards to study because I needed all the help I could get. So here's one set. It's clipped for the binder clip. And then, hold on a second, because they're sliding out of my hand. This is the other set.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had them paper clipped. Like this is RPIE. In the corner, I wrote the category of KSA and the percentage that it was worth. I used different highlighter colors for some of the sections.
Nez, you're much more organized than I am.
Y'all, when you take a test 4 times to pass it, you kind of learn. Yeah, and note cards were nothing that I was familiar with using in high school. but someone suggested it to me and I thought, well, it couldn't hurt to try. So I have all of these cards with, the KSA written in the corner and the value of so I would remember what percentage this was. Some of these note cards are front to back. Some of them are just on the front. So I spent a lot of time and I toted these things around. Now I didn't carry this whole stack all of the time, but I did have the RPIEs with me constantly. And then, these are theories. I had them. So theories in history. So I'm just using that as an example. You use whatever study methods work for you, but I wanted to make sure I showed that to you because I brought it up before, and I still have these cards. And one of the things that helps me by leading these sessions and talking with you all, it forces me to go back into my study guide and relearn some of this, or at least remember some of it. Because these are things that we do oops, I just dropped them all on the floor. These are things that we do all the time. But because I'll use myself as an example, but because I'm so immersed in everything I'm doing, I don't always take the time to step back and think, am I strategizing this the right way? Is there a better theory? But I am focused on outcome, not always on output. I mean, we all know that a press release is not a communications plan. It is output as part of a communications plan. The outcome is we want students to be aware of grant opportunities. We want students who have children to be aware that there are grant funds that help them pay for childcare so they can continue in school. That's the outcome. You want that student to take advantage of that so they can work towards their degree and graduate. But you're not always thinking about that when you're in the middle of a crisis situation and you got to get a message out. At that point, you're just worried about the output. You're not thinking about the outcome or thinking about, should I have used a different strategy or a different communication model to do this? So again, you know these things because you've done them before. You maybe just didn't know what it was called. And clock's running down. So the next part of this section is communication models. There are several, but I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about communication barriers and also to ask you to think about barriers that you experience in your current role when it comes to communications. So communications barriers include things like fuzzy language, misalignment of messages with culture and values, a history of distrust, distractions, negative influencers, sources or spokespersons with no credibility. I think we've had a few of those. We know who some of those people are. Unreliable media is a barrier to communication. Media that people are not comfortable with, for example, blogs or social networks, or for places, for some, if illiteracy is high, printed materials. And that's something that I had thought about on a conversation I was in last night, but about a survey, and someone was saying how difficult it was to respond to the survey. And this man, is college educated, pretty smart, but I thought if he was having trouble responding to this survey, what about somebody who's not as educated as him? What about somebody who's not as literate as he is? Are they going to be just as frustrated and then not participate? Another communication barrier, it says captive audiences, and I'm not really sure how a captive audience would be a communication barrier, and gatekeepers. So of this list, is there anything different that you've experienced in your current work environment or your current role that is a barrier to communication?
Well,
I think,
go ahead, Bridget.
I was just going to say, language, as far as the language that you're speaking, is it English, Spanish, French, what language is it? And then specifically with recruiting students and getting information out to them, and making sure that they can understand it, that if it needs to be translated, that it's translated by someone who actually knows what to do and not someone that's just somewhat familiar with Spanish, because there's so much to take into account when you're translating as well.
Right. Okay. Chris, what about you? What were you going to say?
Well, and I think it might be under misalignment of messages and cultures and values. Some of the events that I would do, the high profile events, I had to work with the local police department, and the police chiefs are the ones that wanted to be involved, and sometimes they're a big challenge to work with. So getting on the same page has been challenging in some of those locations, and understanding their priorities and values, and needing to be aligned with them prior to giving a message to the general public.
Okay, that's a good example. Paul, what about you?
Yeah, a couple of them in the communications barriers, like distractions and negative influencers, we deal with. And I would say for distractions, in my last role, you know, it was all focused on just informing consumers about today's agriculture and how crops are grown, how animals are raised. And one of the distractions was food labels in the grocery stores. Labels that say no hormones, no antibiotics ever, all natural, you know, all these different confusing marketing terms. And so that really confused the public on a whole bunch of issues. And so we had to kind of work around that or address some of those concerns in order to educate and inform the public.
Okay.
I have another one too that I can just bring up. A previous client of mine ended up had out-of-state lawyers trying to get class action lawsuits from the community against the company, and so they were out-of-state agitators that were a distraction to the company putting out its message.
Okay. Yeah, distractions can be a huge communication barrier. Fuzzy language, like Bridget was saying, language that you're using to speak to students. I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten an email from one of the vice chancellors and they said, you know, oh, we need to send this to students. And I'm like, oh, time out. You know, your message that you've written it to faculty, but this isn't how students think or talk. So, you know, I have to take the time to rework it, to write it in a way that is student friendly, not student friendly, but, you know, I'm not talking to other faculty members, and changing you don't want to change the content of the purpose of the message, but you need to check the tone or, you know, change the language so that it's simple language.
Well, and that's the number one rule, right? Know your audience.
Exactly. Know your audience, know your audience, which, you know, I guess that's job security for marketing and communications.
I hope so.
Fingers crossed, right? I also thought this one was interesting as a communication barrier, media with which people are not comfortable. And so I use myself as an example, as I wasn't comfortable with social media, social networks, even 5 to 10 years ago. I'm not super comfortable with it now, but I know the value of it and I know how to use it just enough to be dangerous. But think about that for someone who might not be literate, who might be functionally literate or just flat out illiterate and you don't know it and you hand them something to read, there's a communication barrier. They're not going to be able to read it to you. So ways to overcome communication barriers. I think we've all worked through this, but design and deliver a message so that it gets the attention of the intended public. So again, knowing your audience. Use signs, images, and symbols that relate to experiences common to senders and receivers. So I would say, like, if you use a symbol for a telephone, we all know what a phone symbol looks like, whether you're using a cell phone icon or an old school receiver. We know what those are.
You know, kids these days though aren't going like this. They're going like this.
I know. And yeah, I'm always calm. And
Yeah.
at my mom's house, they still have a landline house phone, thank God. I don't have one here, I wish I did. But the boys know how to use the landline and they know how to use a cell phone. So
Mhm.
we're doing something right, I think.
Yeah.
But they don't know what a typewriter is. Poor babies. It says arouse personality needs in the receiver and offer ways to meet those personality needs. So make sure you are familiar with those communication barriers and ways to overcome them. And there are 7 C's of communication. And I distinctly remember having to know all 7 of those. And so those 7 C's of communication are clarity, credibility, content, context, continuity, capability, and channels. Clarity, credibility, content, context, continuity, capability, channels. So the 7 C's of communication that can help you overcome those barriers. We all know clarity. Make sure it's clear as glass, or as my friend used to ask me to proofread things for her, and she would say, make sure it's stupid proof. And so as much as we thought we were stupid proofing something, there was always, I don't know what this means. Well, it means wear a mask. But anyway, I'll use that as an example. There are 4, it says 4 classic models of public relations. There's a chart, press agency, public information, 2-way asymmetrical and 2-way symmetrical. So make sure you know all 4 of those and make sure you know the differences. And then real quickly, there's a section of eras of public relations history. Don't think that you won't get asked a history question on your computer-based exam, because you will. And then there's a list of figures and events in public relations history. Make sure you know who Samuel Adams is, not the beer company. Please make sure you know who Edward Bernays is. And Ivy Ledbetter Lee, Arthur Page. Those are the ones that I distinctly remember. There are several others. And you will notice that they're not mentioning too many women who are pioneers in public relations. Maybe that's changed, but it's not here in this book. And I believe Ivy Ledbetter Lee is a man, not a woman. But there are women who are pioneers in public relations. I guess we need to work on some agenda setting with PRSA to include some of that, to improve the diversity also. So, I feel like I rushed through the last part, but if you look in your study guide, there is a breakdown of the PR models, the historical periods, the attitudes, and the practitioners in a table format. Make sure you are aware of that. And again, oh, P.T. Barnum, know who? Yes, he is the guy from the circus. So he used some PR tactics, or he used some tactics that we use today in public relations. All right, do y'all have any questions?
Right now.
Are you feeling pretty confident in your studies so far?
Thanks to you, yes.
Oh, okay, good.
I'm feeling better. Yeah.
Feeling better. Okay.
Well, and Nez, I have to say thank you.
You're
Nez
welcome.
has been on the board in the past of PRSA St. Louis, and Nez has agreed to be a co-membership chair for next year. So we're looking forward to having you on the board next year. She's part of the slate. So next week, the membership is going to vote, and I'm sure you'll be confirmed.
Okay.
So
All
thank
right.
you again
Well,
for
once again, if you guys,
work.
if you have questions, you know how to reach me. You can send me an email, call, however, reach out to me through social media. I'll be glad to try and answer any questions for you and help you get there. And so just do your best. And when you're ready for your computer-based exam, take a deep breath, do your best. And if it helps you at all, just remember, I took this test, it took me 4 times. I took it 4 times, and the 4th time I finally passed it. So don't give up, just keep working at it.
So Nez, does the presentation come first or the test?
The presentation. So your readiness review is first, and then if your panel determines that you are ready to move on to the next phase, the computer-based exam is the second phase, is that next phase. And remember, you have 12 months from the time your application is approved to take that, to do your readiness review and take the exam. So please don't wait till the last 3 months of your calendar year to kick it in gear and get things going. Because if you don't pass your readiness review, you have to wait 90 days before you can do it again. And that takes time. 3 months is a long time. So
Okay.
plan accordingly, y'all. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You're
Nez.
welcome.
Appreciate it.
Have a
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
All
All
right,
right.
take
Bye.
See
care.
ya.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You
Yep,
too.
you
Yes.
too. Bye.